there, everybody. I'm going to be doing a tarot reading for P.F. Jung while he does a breakdown of the best factions in the Great Meme Wars. P.F. Jung, I'm not aware of his birthday, so I can't tell you what his astrology sign or his life path number is. I'm not really good with astrology and numerology in a way that I'm confident enough to try to guess what he would be. Maybe a life path 7. Alex Jones, Hassan Piker, and I think Elon Musk are life path 7s. It is the Truth Seekers. So he seems like he's probably one of those guys. I don't know for sure, though. He could be a life path 4, foundation building, or he could be 1. Who the fuck knows? Who cares? It's all irrelevant. No matter what is real, what comes before us is the most real. What we're going to be doing is a tarot reading for him and also for the factions that he will be analyzing. P.F. Jung. I've become aware of his stuff only because this meme stuff, it is actually to some degree fun. Anyone out there who plays Civilization or Tropico, I always think of world politics with some degree, not always, but it's just easy to map it out in my brain as a video game when I look at global politics. If you're into history, I would consider myself in the school of thought of realism, and instead of going into my biases too deeply, I can just slowly lay them out as we do a reading and watch the video. So first, let's do some shuffling. Let's get a little bit of shuffling done. I want to shuffle, and we're just going to draw a card for P.F. Jung. What's going to be the card for him for this video? Because it could be, it could be the High Priestess. Hey, okay, and that makes sense. So if we're going to look at P.F. Jung as the High Priestess, I think that's exactly how he would view himself as well. The High Priestess is a spiritual enlightenment, inner enlightenment, inner spirit. You have spiritual wisdom, spiritual knowledge. You might have lived more lives than a lot of your peers. It's psychic insight. It's intuition, putting things together with a sort of what P.F. Jung would call vibes. This is the vibes card. So I kind of feel like we're off to a good start.
Is in the midst of a giant ideological civil war known as the Great Meme Wars. This is one of the most popular and consequential grand strategy games of the past few years, so I want to give an overview and walk through each of the major factions you can play and give them an overall rating. Starting out, we have the MAGA movement. This is one of the more popular, well-known factions, and really their playstyle is managing the decline of a large empire. You start off the game with a lot of territory, a lot of influence, but you have to manage a lot of internal disputes that are threatening the stability of your empire. You do have Donald Trump, who's one of the most powerful faction leaders in the game.
Okay, so we drew a 5 of Swords for the MAGA movement. What I would also like to do is draw a card for the strengths and the weaknesses of the movement. MAGA, in this video, says very strong walls and immigration enforcement, and the weaknesses, need to prioritize Israel's interests over the United States. That would be his analysis of MAGA. I want to draw cards for these strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to draw a card for strength. And we're going to draw a card for weaknesses. Cool. For MAGA, we got the 5 of Swords. 5 of Swords is sort of like a competition, person versus person, people versus people. The desire to win is incredibly high, and also the fear of losing is incredibly high. Or the viewing of losing is not an option. So, willing to die for something. That is kind of what a Five of Swords type of card would be at times. I mean, if you're in conflict of that nature. Or it could just be you're in an argument with someone, and you being victorious in this argument, you're willing to resort to rhetoric, you're willing to resort to name calling, trying to psychologically dissect someone, doing whatever you can in order to win this argument. I do think this is interesting of a card to get for MAGA, because I am someone who is in the debate world a lot. I like to debate. I like to watch people debate. I do think MAGA and Zionists argue in that way. I think there is just kind of like this desire to win the argument in a way that ends up kind of like it's more about the conflict than it is the fact that you're trying to exchange ideas with another individual. P.F. Jung saying that the weakness of MAGA is the priority of Israel. That kind of goes hand in hand because at the very least, Zionists and MAGA people, in my experience, are very similar to argue with. Okay, so we got reverse Ace of Pentacles for weaknesses. Now, he's saying it's the Israel thing. I think P.F. Jung is sort of, he's trying to maybe explore Donald Trump's particular weakness. Maybe because he's doing the video game analogy, he decided, he's trying to just show like what you would see in a faction selection menu. My edibles are starting to kick in really hard. What the reverse Ace of Pentacles kind of says, you're not really planning things out. You're not thinking ahead. You're not planning things out. Pentacles is also a sort of like a finance thing or a material thing. Ace of Pentacles reverse, it's kind of like you're not really thinking about what your money is going to look like in the future. I mean, a lot of people who complain about MAGA bring up, what's it called? What's that fucking bullshit called? Inflation. And I may not really be able to talk about all this right now, only because it's kind of, we're veering off from the important stuff, which is the cards, right? You don't want to hear my views on politics. You want to hear about the hocus pocus mumbo jumbo that I do. 10 of Cups for the strengths. Everyone in your family, everyone in your life is happy. Yay, we found a way. We found a way to be happy forever. We did it, guys. We're a family. We're one, it is the contentment card. 10 of Cups is the happy family card. And in this card, we got the abolition of work as kind of like a description of what would make a family happier is like if the parents didn't have to work all day and if the kids didn't have to just strive to be workers all day, then we'd have a pretty happy family, right? MAGA, I do think their strength, however, is that they're very content on where this is all going. So a happy family, I don't know if that would currently describe MAGA. This Epstein thing has really thrown them through a loop. But up until then, definitely was its strength. By having someone to worship and someone to view as your savior, someone who is going to bring down this giant network of, like, this belief that that's what the any president is going to do, already is kind of like giving you hope for something that is just like impossible. There's something about like, oh, this guy is going to get rid of all the dangerous criminals. He's going to get rid of all the corrupt politicians. He's going to, and then eventually when the Epstein thing became a thing, he's going to bring down the deep state. Hooray, our hero, Donald Trump, this one man is going to make it all happen. And we trust him without a doubt, even though like he's known to kind of be more of a rhetoric guy and not a facts guy. He's a vibes guy. So, that's kind of interesting. All right. So hopefully that gives it I don't know how much of that I'm going to edit out, but hopefully that.
But he does lack a clear successor and one of the core mechanics. Next up, we have the woke left. The woke left is the largest left-wing faction and the primary challenger to the MAGA movement. They also start off with a pretty large power base at the beginning of the game, and one of the core mechanics in the Great Meme Wars is, for any large ideological faction, is keeping it together, keeping it stable, keeping it unified. And the woke left, if you play with them, you're going to be doing kind of a similar thing. Their play style is they gain influence by advocating for people who face real real oppression, because from an ideological point of view, you have the compassion instinct in people, and if your movement is centered around drawing attention to people who genuinely do need compassion, then your movement, will spread and will grow in influence. The woke left have very strong cultural domination and production. They have good universities, good artists, good musicians that produce a lot of wokeness. Their faction leader is okay, the Shah, Hassan Pike.
So we drew a 9 of swords for the woke left, and we're also going to pull out I'm not going to say that. That's not even funny to say such a thing. Strength, reverse 8 of Pentacles, and weaknesses, reverse 7 of Swords. A lot of cool stuff on this card, and I couldn't say what any of this shit is. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. I mean, what, HR? I mean, that would make sense, right? HR as woke? I think that would be a very good description, at least of like the woke part of the woke left. Social engagement, social science. Okay, yeah, makes sense. Or the 9 of Swords is a depression, anxiety, fear. Like they're worried all the time about all the horrors of the world, which would make sense because intersectionality is probably a lot of people right of center or center to center right would probably look at, like, they would associate intersectionality as a discipline with the woke left and what the woke left is responsible for, like in some negative way maybe. Within one nation, there are several groups that have their own unique difficulties and also privileges, that would be very associated with the woke left. And as a result, especially someone like Hassan, I would see that as very alarmist of an attitude or I would say that they have like a very alarmist attitude towards the various oppressions of the world. That's kind of how, SJWs were depicted as in the 2016 election with Trump versus Clinton. It was kind of displayed, at least with media and social media, that the left, or at least the woke left, or what we would now call the woke left, is incredibly despaired over the oppressiveness of status quo movements and the racist, the bigoted people. So this I would say this card makes a lot of sense for woke left. For the strengths, we got a reverse 8 of Pentacles. A lot of like self-discipline to some degree. Now, if we were looking at Hassan Piker specifically, I mean, this would make a lot of sense. He's a guy who works out a lot and he does a lot of Twitch streaming, like he's dedicated to it. I'm just trying to see how the cards relate to the reading. If we're looking at Hassan Piker specifically, that would make sense. 8 of Pentacles reverses like a perfectionism card, and it doesn't necessarily suggest like perfectionism is a good thing. If you were to have a lot of problems with the woke left's desire for everyone to be ideologically sound, to have like a very devoted attitude towards like the eradication of bigotry, well, that's principled, right? I mean, I'm just thinking of it as like different factions. I would say like principled, utopian in a way, like where it can be seen as like, okay, so you're sound. It makes sense. One can explore it that way. I mean, in my opinion, the quote unquote woke left, if represented by Hassan Piker is what we're talking about, I find that Hassan's politics is kind of like it's very online, and Hassan Piker himself is not like the best representative of like this thing that has existed on the internet for a while. We used to call them social justice warriors. And then before social media, there was this, political correctness was the term used to describe like an element of what you call the woke left. Political correctness is always going to be that thing that inherently makes a lot of people just not take it as seriously as they would take like the left in general. Especially because political correctness combines control with shame. People don't respond well to that, right? It's not to say that it's wrong in principle, because one could say don't tell me what to do, and America's not really racist, right? We got rid of slavery. We no longer pump crack into the ghettos, and we no longer assassinate black leaders, and we kind of hard to take seriously the reactionary arguments, right? Oh, okay, but I'm not gonna for all of what the perceived flaws of the woke left are, they are inherently principled, and that is something that can be seen as a strength. Now, for the weaknesses, reverse Seven of Swords. And funny enough, I do think this is a pretty good way to talk about at least people like Hassan Piker. And also, in some sense, he is a good representative of that inherent thing that the left itself has become incredibly associated with and tied with, which is like virtue signaling privileged people. Virtue signaling as a form of deceit, which is kind of like how you would see the reverse Seven of Swords card. Like you're tricking yourself into being more woke than probably you really are. And I think that is a big Hassan thing, because that is kind of like the inherent struggle of trying to be a more progressive individual who comes from a very privileged background. Like, how much have you really deconstructed the privileged and oppressive parts of you enough to be talking as if that's what you've done? In my opinion, a very difficult thing to put into words already. The argument over virtue signaling, the problem with it is that a lot of people who argue over virtue signaling are kind of doing it in a way that doesn't have any kind of like grounding with the people who would even care about virtue signaling. Like, it's like, okay, you're arguing that people are virtue signaling. Yeah, sure, that's true. What are you going to do about it? Some people are going to virtue signal. Hassan Piker is one of those people. He is part of the progressive left movement, and he has progressive views, but he struggles to actually live with an inherent sense of morality and desire to be progressive. Also, he has different phases of his life, like every other individual, where he has to learn from his mistakes in real time while everyone watches. While I'm someone who can just laugh at him, fucking facepalm and cringe every time he fucking makes a bad argument or says like something misogynistic, or it just inherently leans into anti-Semitism and then just rolls his eyes and shrugs it off. In my opinion, I don't really think the conversation around virtue signaling is very fair. That is its weakness, right? It's an inherently unappealing thing, and it doesn't even feel real. It feels like everyone who's involved is just bullshitting, and to some degree, that's because they are.
Baker, he has a lot of upfront charisma, but he's not really an effective leader, and one of the interesting challenges will be, finding someone on the woke left who can actually unite the movement in an effective way. The overall rating here is a B. They're pretty good, and they suffer from the same issue that a lot of large ideological factions.
Okay, so slightly higher than MAGA, which is, if you're on the woke left, good for you. He is a good, in some sense, I'll come around on that and say he is a good representative of the woke left, and that's how these cards came out. So my initial bias put me against P.F. Jung's analysis, but reading the cards put me right on balance with him.
Suffer from. Next, we have the Environmentalists. This is a really fun faction to play. They have the potential to snowball very early. They gain influence every time a severe weather event happens because everyone can look at it and go, oh my god, the climate is changing, things are getting worse, and then the Environmentalists suddenly get a bunch of new followers. So it's a very durable path to victory for the Environmentalists. They have a very strong economy with some great farming bonuses, and their activists are able to draw a lot of attention to the cause, but often they are a little cringe themselves and can be repelling of people at times. Their main weakness is their units lack a lot of mobility because other than their grass-fed cavalry, they don't have access to...
Yeah, all right, let's do a real shuffle, unedited. Get that weakness card. The weakness of the Environmentalists. We draw all three reverse cards for the Environmentalists. Just my initial thoughts on that without even going deeply into the cards is that if you're an environmentalist, a lot of things, it's a dark picture. Things are looking pretty bleak. Environmentalists are just the people who are holding on to the that we can do anything. And unfortunately for the environmentalists, and for anyone who is against environmentalists, unfortunately for everyone, is that the science is on their side. The oncoming ecological disasters, the droughts, the dying crops, the possibility of like horrible ancient viruses being uncovered by the melting ice caps. That stuff is mostly real. You know, I mean, the severity of some of these things may not be as horrible as they're thinking, but it seems like it's pretty bad, and there's not like, you know, our current leaders, which are the billionaires, the ones who have all the power, they're not really doing anything to guarantee that we're going to be fine. Like us, just the people who have no money, no power, no property. All right, but let's get into the cards, because that's what we're here for, right, folks? Well, you know, reverse two of swords. All right, well, first let's look at this card, because I do think it's interesting. H.G. Wells, advocate of one world state. If we had one world government, it would at least be like, okay, now we can decide we're going to do something to help make sure that everyone has water, everyone has food, and everyone gets some decent amount of shelter. Slavoj Zizek is someone who says that he's like a communist still in the idea that there should be one world government to deal with climate change. Like that's specifically what I don't know, like I'm not saying verbatim, but like that's basically what he said. Like his more recent positions on like his more recent like utopian ideology would be communist, because he wants there to be a one world government to make sure that we deal with environmental catastrophe and stuff like that. Strengths and weaknesses, I mean, like, even though initially I said all reverse cards doesn't have to be all bad. In this case, it is a little bit. Reverse star is like despair, nihilism, disassociation from everyone and everything. But let's try to look at it as a strength. If the one strength to get out of it is that you need a spiritual reawakening, and you need to really look deep down inside and find what matters there, and to try to disconnect from all the external negativity. Their strength is that many of them are capable of like finding what deep down inside matters. I think that is actually kind of a good way to look at it. You know, that's going to be my interpretation of that as a strength. And I think in a sense, it's kind of like, you know, when you have nothing left, that is when you are free. I can think about when I learned about the green anarchists. And I think that kind of like pushed me into the world of like anarchism, like an actual viewpoint that I can confidently put myself on. If you take the science seriously, and if you take world politics seriously, it's a bit of a lost cause, and it's a very difficult pill to swallow if you're like a working class person who's just like has to fucking watch it all happen, knowing what's happening and knowing who's in charge and who's making it worse and how much they don't give a fuck about doing anything to make it better. It's a very destructive, awful feeling. It's very soul destroying. That is actually inherently kind of good for you. Passive nihilism is just living in a world that forces you to live in a way that you know is just not for you, and you know it's not inherently true, but you are forced to live it anyways. You just are in despair. Active nihilism is you decide to destroy current structures so that you can build your own. Because otherwise there's nothing we can do. What are we going to like vote? Who are we going to vote for to save the environment? You need activism. It's the only way to get anything. It's to bring attention. Some people are going to, you know, but whatever. Let's look at the weaknesses, which is the reverse ace of cups. Reverse ace of cups, I would say, is like not a terrible card. It's a emotional repression card, a card that is telling you, like, if we were to look at it as a strength, which we're not going to, but if it was a strength of some kind, it would be about like self-nurturement and self-love. And the weakness of the ace of cups is keeping it all inside, which I guess could be seen as passive nihilism. So in a sense, active nihilism is the strength, passive nihilism is the weakness, and the balance of it is what can determine the strength of the entire faction, right? That's how we're looking at it, like video games. Because we are grown men who do gay ass shit like this and treat it all like it's a video game, because that's how we understand the world.
To a lot of the mobile transports that emit CO2 that other factions have access to. So I'm going to give them a B- because they do struggle to move around the map, which is a problem, but they do have a consistent source of ideological power to draw from. And at the end of the day, it is generally good to conserve the environment. People are naturally wired to be sympathetic to that. So they stand to be able to gain influence if they can kind of, strip themselves of the more cringe aspect of their ideology. Next up, we have
what
the
do you mean?
LGBTQ
Like, first, I
Armada.
do gotta say, I don't know what you mean by that. He's just talking about people doing gay shit. I think that's like really what it. Oh, you threw tomato soup on a painting. Like what? Like you just Googled what? Environmentalists being cringe, and that's the image that you got, and you're like, okay, yeah, I guess that's kind of part of their. That's what makes them weak.
A subfaction of the woke left and is sort of known as the infamous vanguard of the woke left. They have a very aggressive play style. They like to shove their beliefs down the throats of everyone who isn't them. They're sort of known as the ideological colonizer. They like to plant their flag everywhere. They have very strong shock troops. The Two-Spirit is a powerful Native American warrior that does a lot of damage up front, very effective. At the beginning of the game, they start off at war with both the Christian Nationalists and the Red Pill movement, but they are actually at peace with the
All right, so he's not really like, doesn't understand the need to radically support the LGBTQ movement, which, understandable, right? Not everyone can know everything at all times. We have to figure it out at some point in our lives, and maybe we'll die before that happens. And hopefully in the next life, we bring the tools necessary to finally figure out that it does not matter if there's rainbow flags on everything we buy for the rest of our lives. We're in a world where that is just like something that we have no control over, right? It doesn't matter what you fucking... The woke left and the LGBTs are not really like in charge of corporate America and their fucking cold calculating decisions. We decided to make Spider-Man black in order to get the black crowd. Just little baby children, right? Like, children watch these movies. I know adults do. I watch them occasionally, just out of curiosity. Sometimes I'm just in the mood to watch a movie. I like to consume. They're just getting shittier because of the editing. It's like a big thing. It's just like editing is too fast. And it's very funny. When you watch an A24 movie, they tend to be longer than what average audience want out of a movie. And you notice that a lot of people say these movies are boring. Now, why do they say they're boring? Because they're not edited fast enough. The movies take their time with each scene, and it makes people like me enjoy the movie more. But like, not a lot of people like that. And I don't really think it's like something that is a huge, like, it's not an indicator like, oh, I prefer movies to be more good. It's more so that I prefer movies to be like that, but that's not what makes money. So they're just always going to go with that. They're putting rainbow flags on whatever that you buy, because they realize that is what's going to make them more money. And they don't give a fuck about you. And the gay people have a completely different problem from everyone else. Yeah, some gay people are like happy that they get to see some gay ass movie, right? They constantly seem to have actual real issues that are very unique. And there are people on television, people in politics, who speak about trans people especially, but also gay people, as like a social contagion that needs to be wiped out. And that's a very terrifying thing to hear from politicians and to hear from prominent conservatives. So that's the reason why, like, it just seems like you just haven't figured it out yet when you speak about it that way. But, that's all just me being woke and gay, right? Weakness. The Two of Pentacles. I mean, this is pretty... The Six of Swords reversed and normal is like a transition card. Reverse Six of Swords is more like a spiritual transition card. Your being, your spirit, not like your spirit, like your beliefs. Your spirit belief, which is actually very interesting that he brought up the Two-Spirit. I mean, that's pretty cool. I definitely wouldn't see RuPaul as I think that's it. He doesn't really know the gay world at all. At least, like, why would he? I mean, it also requires a lot of sacrifice to some degree, or like emotional. Not like real sacrifice. You could. The Nine of Wands is one of the strengths. Nine of Wands is a card of like bravery, perseverance. He says flamboyant shock troops. another thing where it's like he didn't even bother to like actually like for the MAGA thing. He said immigration enforcement, keeping foreign enemies out, is good at keeping foreign enemies out. And it's like, are we supposed to look at it like it's just a game, like it's just a video game, and not like analysis of like the real world? Or is it, you're giving the LGBT's strength is bullshit. It's nothing. You're not giving it anything. But I think the Nine of Wands is a pretty good one. They're brave. They're stunning and brave people. Two of Pentacles isn't like, as we look at like Pentacles, maybe sometimes as money, sometimes as material conditions. Material, right? But material conditions is like how to look at like a political thing, like the gay rights movement or whatever. So if it is their weakness, it's probably that they just have a lot of shit on their plate. It's also like kind of like if you see, okay, so this card, if it's like a more negative version, it can also be seen like the inability to blend what you want with what the world wants. And to some degree, we could look at kind of like maybe the political correctness of it is the gay rights movement's difficulty in adapting to like the real world, like maybe like a lack of pragmatism. That's kind of how I would interpret what Two of Pentacles would be seen as a weakness for this gay rights movement. All right, we'll keep going.
Broader MAGA movement, because obviously a lot of leaders in the MAGA movement are themselves a member of the LGBTQ Armada. So overall, if we're going to rate them, I'm going to give them an A- because they have a pretty straightforward, aggressive...
And that is like something where he's not completely off. I mean, the MAGA movement, while it is filled with homophobes, and while it is not like inherently fighting for gay rights, and a lot of libertarian gay guys would be like, these gay people are trying to start businesses, and the Democrats want to increase taxes and make it difficult to start a business. So therefore, that's the gay rights we're fighting for.
Play style at the beginning of the game. They
Good,
know,
you gave it an A-.
what to do. They know where to go. Their only real drawback is more in the late game when they experience low population growth in their major cities, because obviously they can't reproduce. Okay, next we have the Trans-Humanists. So this is obviously the more techno-focused faction in the game. They have access to the largest tech tree as well as research bonuses on everything. The way they gain influence is by convincing people that the human body is frail and weak, and by focusing on all the vulnerabilities of humanity. They promise technological augmentation to the human experience, which obviously does have legitimate applications, like with Neuralink and all that, helping people who are disabled. So that's how they're going to gain a lot of influence. On the other hand, there's something very off trying to play God and trying to achieve immortality. And the prospect of uploading your consciousness to a computer where time can be artificially slowed down and then you can be tortured at an ever increasing infinite rate, thereby creating hell in reality, is not a great prospect. And so, that's kind of a barrier for a lot of people with the Transhumanists. They're good at using AI to spread their memes, and they obviously have access to the cyborg units, which are pretty powerful and aggressive. Overall, we're going to give them a C.
Five of Wands. On this card, we got like William Blake. I don't know anything about him. On the card, it also says modern anarchism and fighting against religious and political oppression. All right, so funny enough, I said anarchists. In the video, he's saying soldiers and immortal faction leaders. So Five of Wands is a bunch of people fighting card, and it's kind of cool to think of transhumanists in that way. Soldiers like cyborg soldiers, psychic soldiers. That's probably if it could ever happen. I mean, definitely robot soldiers. I mean, that is definitely the future of Western imperialism. If corporations are able to gain a certain amount of power, or individuals like Musk and Zuckerberg are able to get a certain amount of power, they could start just really arming themselves on a large scale where they can actually become their own sovereign entity. That's going to create a lot of conflict and also a lot of anarchists and a lot of, direct action leftists of all kinds. But even the MLs, I'm sure all of them to some degree can find a benefit to the use of transhumanist ways of thinking to create our own resistance. That's all in the future, right? That's the transhumanist way of thinking. That would be my interpretation of its weakness, but let's try to actually look at the strengths and weaknesses of this fucking card. Yeah, justice as a strength card. A lot of transhumanists believe that this is like a way to kind of rectify a lot of the unfair things in your life, in all people's lives. I mean, there's like global ways of looking at it that really are like utopian socialism, using the advancement of technology and the advancement of human integration with technology as like a way to right the inherent wrongs of the world, which include, like, if we can achieve post-scarcity, use of technology to solve problems. That's really what we're talking about. Thinking about the Queen of Cups as a weakness is, it's taking me a little bit. It is interesting that, we got the first computer programmer, Ada Lovelace, a mathematician, first computer programmer, trademark programming language developed by U.S. Department of Defense. So if we were to look at that as a weakness, maybe transhumanists underestimate DARPA's intentions. I'm just trying to see what kind of weakness, because the Queen of Cups, that's a good card. But you also think about like, well, you're drawing a card because you're missing something. Maybe look at it like the transhumanist faction isn't in touch with their emotions and their compassion, keeping in touch with your humanity.
Plus, just because they're fairly niche, they're fairly hard to play, and kind of anti-human at the end of the day. Next up, we have the Christian Nationalists. The Christian Nationalists are another right-wing faction, and they probably have...
Yeah, he said what the card came up. It's not a very huge... what the fuck did he say? Am I going to rewind?
They're fairly hard to play, and kind of anti-human at the end of the day. Next up, we have the Christian Nationalists.
Maybe if they're not keeping in touch with their humanity. That's a very similar perspective. All right, that's pretty cool.
Nationalists. The Christian Nationalists are another right-wing faction, and they probably have the highest early game potential in terms of being a real successor to the MAGA movement and sort of taking up all of the MAGA movement's influence as it sort of declines. The Christian Nationalists have a very tried and true sort of traditional religious play style that is very much by the book, because as Western culture continues to decline, face degeneracy, encourage and facilitate more and more atomization and loneliness and isolation, the Christian Nationalists are there to offer an alternative, bringing people into the church, so on and so forth. And that positions them as a meme that has the potential for a lot of influence with people who are suffering from the negative effects of living in sort of a decadent society. They have very strong monks and warrior priests who are very aggressive in their preaching and can convert a lot of people over to their team. Overall, we're going to give them an A-. These are a very high potential faction. They have a lot of political and cultural infrastructure there to capitalize on the decline of the MAGA movement. But as with...
so officially, he gave it an A- to the Christian Nationalists. Now, I think he's just like a little bit... Like, people look at corporate media like it's like, oh, okay, there we go. Corporate media. The Christian... Like, to believe that your religion should be legally enforced and that there should be like a unifying religion in your nation. That's a very specific type of thinking. Now, on this Six of Swords card, you have Martin Heidegger, and he's a member of the Nazi Party. We got a Nazi thing going on with this. It's pretty good for Christian nationalists to some degree. I mean, it's not like perfectly descriptive of Christian nationalism, but nationalism itself. Their strength is reverse Knight of Cups. The reverse Knight of Cups would be like, I guess you just don't have any charm or whatever. Like, but as a strength, let's think. Why would you draw a reverse Knight of Cups for strength? It's like an overly romantic bullshit card. So maybe, overly romantic bullshit of Christianity is actually very useful at kind of controlling the masses to some degree. I don't agree that it's really going to be like a viable strategy for like, long-term utopianism, but perhaps that is still what is their strength. A- seems like it's high because it's fucking Christian nationalism. Their weakness, if the Five of Cups is their weak, it's like their inherent failure, which makes sense. Five of Cups is like, you can't, either you are a failure, you lost, you did something and then you fucked up. You did something and you just can't let go. You can't let go of the inherent embarrassment and guilt. Getting that as a weakness, I mean, that is probably like a big thing. It's interesting that this drawing is more for like fascists, while this Christian nationalist thing is like, Christian nationalists technically are their own breed of the, but this is like, it's not quote unquote fascist that we're really talking about here. It's like just what is easy to describe as fascist, Nazi, discriminatory type of totalitarian and authoritarian.
Many of these ideologies, well, all of them really, they can go too extreme, they can become repulsive, they can become sort of degenerate themselves, and they really need to figure out how to get over the sectarian divisions between the Orthodox, the Protestants, the Catholics, because right now it is not looking clear how they're going to make it out of there. Okay, next we have the Libertarians. This is sort of the largest alternative faction to the MAGA movement or the woke left, and they're a very interesting faction to play as. They have the strongest economy in the game because they don't pay taxes on any of their gold mining, and they have access to child labor to increase their villager gathering rates. In the most recent patch, they got access to a new starting faction leader, Thomas Massie, who is pretty good, has pretty good commitment to principle, is very good at opposing both the woke left and the MAGA movement, but he suffers from a lot of name recognition. So if you're going to play Libertarians in the early game, you got to really use and abuse Thomas Massie and try and, spread your influence through that vector. The biggest problem with the Libertarians, as always, is their own extremists.
Okay, so he says increases gold income due to low taxes, which that's their strength. And Libertarians, at least represented by people like Thomas Massie, is probably like more what he's talking about. He says left-wing and right-wing ideologies, but this whole increases gold income due to low taxes strengths obviously wouldn't apply to the left-wing type of libertarians. To some degree, yes, only because left-wing libertarians also include the market socialists. But market socialism doesn't only have to be in a libertarian type of government, because China is kind of like a market communism type of weird hybrid. And, the government doesn't allow for, this like network, this decentralized network of greedy rent extractors, which is a massive failure of capitalism in areas where it's thriving. In the United States, that's a major issue for everyday people. But libertarian ideology is more so, if we're going to talk about left-wing libertarian, it's like, or the fact that it can be left-wing, I mean, libertarian would be associated more with liberty, but I guess that would not be the strength. He's talking about market like specifically capitalist libertarianism and market libertarianism, mostly not left-wing. We got a reverse hermit for the libertarian. The hermit is like the guy, it's like the word says itself, right? Or the word speaks of it, right? You're talking about a hermit, a person like Ted Kaczynski. It's someone who kind of like lives, it is not someone who believes ideologically, individualism or anything. The hermit is someone who lives off the grid and someone who really lives outside of society. And we are all hermits, don't worry. Some people like attach themselves to a very specific track, and then, you can get lost, and that's, we're not all in touch with our hermit side. And to some degree, that is for collective good. We all need to kind of feel some need to be a part of society, especially because of how many of us there are and what could be dangerous about letting us just wander off and do whatever we want. But at the same time, it takes a hermit to like really do things, It takes a hermit to really make changes. The reverse hermit is like an isolation card. So, isolationists, libertarians are isolationists. There we go. All right, so reverse Six of Swords, we had it before, but looking at it as a strength. If we're talking about right-wing libertarians, I could see their strength being that they're like a more realistic way to look at the right-wing side of politics. Like libertarians who actually just view like centralized bureaucracy as inefficient in managing things. And then a reverse Ace of Swords for weaknesses, which I think is probably a more juicy one to look at. To some degree, the weakness of especially the right-wing libertarian movement is being able to like get everyone on board.
They suffer from a serious crisis of being overrun by what are effectively and be very cringe and have very bad ideas that make them that limit their ability to gain influence in the broader population.
Have a government-issued license to drive a car.
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
Okay, you think, a couple of crazy guys, right, who want to get rid of driver's licenses, because these fucking machines are, we're just going to let everyone fucking drive it no matter what, and who gives a fuck, and we can't stop them?
The license to drive? I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.
See, no, that's what all of them believe. What? That's pretty fucking crazy. That's not something that you can really get a lot of people on board with, even if it was a good idea.
Overall, the Libertarians will get a B- for having good potential, but a lot of freaks weighing their own movement down. Next, we have the infamous Groypers. This is a right-wing faction that is an insurgent movement. They have a very insurgent play style. They start off the game waging a guerrilla war against the MAGA movement, and they basically gain influence every time a MAGA leader, explicitly bows down and kisses the ring of Israel. The Groyper playstyle is focused on capitalizing off of sort of angry young men, the resent they feel, and they do this effectively with a lot of shock humor, a lot of provocative memes, provocative statements and ideas, and they have a very charismatic and influential faction leader in Nick Fuentes. Their main weakness is that they seem to be infiltrated by a lot of closeted gay men and sexual deviants, but their units do get bonus damage against all Jewish factions, so you can decide if that trade-off is worth it. Overall, I'm going to give them an A-, actually, because they do stand to gain a lot of influence. All the conditions are set up at the beginning of the game for them to grow. The main problem is just during the late game, they don't really have any...
Okay, so I've only heard this term very recently, so A-, what the, okay, so who gives a fuck, right? It's just an A- based on video game stats that don't exist. Now, Reverse Knight of Cups, that came up recently. Reverse Knight of Cups is like, you're extra. But if we're trying to look at it neutrally, then maybe you can kind of look at like the over-romantic type of human to be kind of like endearing in some way. Now, the Hierophant for the strength of the Groypers, as he describes it, which seems to be the far-right guys, like Nick Fuentes, from my understanding, is like a monarchist. I remember him saying he believes in a king. There should be a king, and if the king was so bad, then, the people would kill him. So that to me is like, a very specific type of far-right conservative way of thinking. The Hierophant, this guy in this book is kind of like, it's interesting. It's a way to look at almost like advanced liberalism or some shit. Non-lethal warfare, the U.S. Army as like a force for peace. If we were to try to take like the most Steelman-like way of looking at these types of far-right nationalists, their strength is their commitment to like tradition and religion. He would be like a better example. And he's also open about his hatred of Jewish people. So like he's open about his fascist ways of thinking. So that's inherently kind of like what makes him a little bit stronger than like the Tucker Carlsons of the world. They're working towards similar goals. They just have possibly different ways of reacting. If you look at Groypers compared to Christian nationalists, it's like the based way of telling people exactly what you believe, no matter how extreme and antisocial it sounds. It's what strengthens ideology at all. If you are religiously attached to your ideology, that's a very strong bond, and we can all go by the same exact rules. Now you can like construct your perfect utopia because everyone is bound by these rules, these customs, these laws, these traditions. But their weakness is not justice. It's not like a just way of looking at the world. And that is also why their faction is so small. Like, it's difficult to get everyone on board. Tucker Carlson, if he represents Christian nationalists and he's part of a covert operation, which do you think he is? The Groypers are kind of the same thing, right? There's just like a different strategic approach. One has a more strategic approach, while the other one is, committing propaganda of the deed by just doing what he wants to do and showing that there's at least, if anything, the Groypers are a measure for the covert operation to see the strength of public appeal. When the Groypers make more money, that is a good way to tell if the rest of the gang can come out in public and say what they believe in.
Maturity or end goal that is not kind of totally ironic and memeified. So if you're going to play as the Groypers, you really need to focus and strip some of the more insane shit from the movement, and then it'll gain more influence. Okay, next up we have the radical centrists.
Yep, he got when he says insane shit, he's talking about like the inherently unjust way of thinking of the world and how people should organize.
This is one of the most unique factions in my opinion. They're a very small but highly specialized and niche faction that makes use of extremely potent mimetic weaponry, right? They have the League of Politics, Champion Spotlights, and other videos where they use relatively sophisticated video game analogies to offer somewhat poignant political commentary in a way that is really digestible for a lot of people. Their greatest strength, though, is their diplomatic skills. They, bar none, have the best diplomacy in the game. They have the ability to engage in in productive ideological discussions with everyone from far-right Christian nationalists to resistance liberals to far-left radical Marxists and left-wing video essayists. So their playstyle is unique because they...
This is more for the work of a psychologist, and I'll do my best to just approach this in fun and just be like a fun tarot reading. Yay. Isn't it? It's all a game. The King of Swords, representing the radical centrists, makes perfect sense. That is exactly how P.F. Jung views himself. Someone who is very good at conversations, talking with all sides of things, really weighing out all the ideas and all the options. P.F. Jung believes that knows the right way or has the answer for how to approach intellectual thought. And to some degree, yes, if you believe, if we were to focus on the aspect of like communication and respectful communication, and at least trying to like respond to people's arguments, whether, you know, he's good at understanding what they're saying is a different story, but he's at least respectful, and that's like inherently a very like powerful thing for anyone who wants to like get into philosophy. And you need to be able to at the very least talk to everyone, weigh out ideas and debate them. For strengths, we got a reverse Knight of Wands. So the Knight of Wands on this card is the Unabomber Manifesto. We got a reverse Knight of Wands for P.F. Jung's strength. Reverse Knight of Wands as a strength, it's kind of like the willingness to be its own thing, like kind of typically like if it was just in a reading, it would just be like seen as like it's a bit impulsive, a bit out of control, a bit, you know, all over the place. But as a strength, it can be, especially with this world of YouTube and, you know, all these things, it might be to the benefit, because one of the videos that he came out with, you know how some people say they watch because they want to watch a dumpster fire, and in a sense that is, I guess, the strength of even the ideology itself, the commitment to this concept of centrism and whatever. That is the strength of this whole thing, is that people entertain it at all because it's silly. All right. And the weakness being the Knight of Pentacles. I think radical centrism, maybe it could, because it's like a you know, Knight of Pentacles is kind of it's a hard work card. And I think for radical centrism as an ideology, it's not like doing the due diligence to kind of like analyze things fairly. It's analyzing things equally to some degree, or at least that's the attempt here, at least from what I've seen. There are some things out there that do require more serious analysis of. Trying to be nuanced, it becomes unnuanced because it restricts itself. Even if it was to consciously try to relinquish, like saying, oh, but radical centrism can be broken. Subconsciously, it seems to like worship this idea, which, you know, what some people call ideologically captured. It's not dialectical materialism, right? The problem with these kind of enlightened ways of thinking on the internet, like these ideologies that, you know, they don't originate on the internet, but they like expand more in this sort of like philosophical, quasi-apolitical self-suck. We're so intelligent that we don't really like take strong positions on most, like on things, or like really dedicate ourselves to any particular true belief. And the thing about Marxism is that it's like, yeah, most of the working class, they have everyday struggles. If they get bad enough, then people will eventually not give a shit about they won't be like, oh, I want to keep going to work and making nothing and being just paid. I'm just going to stop paying things. I'm just going to fucking, if they come for me, I'll kill. There is a deep-seated attempt to keep everyone under control by a very powerful nations and corporations and different interests. Thousands of different individuals are involved in this very tiny people who run things type of world. But like there are other people who are saying, no, the people who run things are based on race, or race is what differentiates us. Like, we can't trust people based on their race. And the people who are, you know, one type of gender want to have more equality, and that's going to destabilize things, make it harder for your family to grow up and not be gay. So let's say lack of dialectical material.
They don't really engage in direct political action. They sort of operate a little bit behind the scenes and try to form temporary ideological coalitions, uniting people to push for more pro-social outcomes that every mimetic faction would agree on, like increasing adoption adoption of nuclear power, implementing ranked choice voting, or making schools cell phone free to prevent social media psychosis on adolescent minds. The biggest weakness of the radical centrists is their faction leader is kind of a tool. He's incredibly bad at communicating to autistic people because he's constantly making these vibes-based arguments, these appeals to intuition, and he employs irony and ironic detachment way too much to the point where he will often refer to himself in the third person and make criticism or commentary about himself as if it's like, I probably announced this above. Centrism.
Not like
They have a similar playstyle to the Groypers, although they're a much larger faction, although a bit more diffuse. They also gain influence by appealing to resentful young men, mostly. They have a very strong online presence with bonus damage against females and all ideologies that are related to or allied with feminism. And like all right-wing factions, they start off at war with the woke left, and they are in a particularly brutal conflict with the LGBTQ Armada. Overall, I'm going to give them a C-, primarily because
all right, C-, and we got the weakness over here. So we got reverse 7 of cups to represent the red pill movement, which I think it's interesting because like the red pill movement kind of tries to argue to us that there's like a utopia out there, but we can't get to it thanks to all the feminists and globalists and whoever else, you want to blame.
Utopia can also be seen as, something that we've left behind because the 7 of cups is upside down by abandoning traditional values and by being degenerate, allowing gender roles to be more neutral and, no longer subjugating women. Now we are going to collapse as a society, or we are just further from utopia.
Someone like Andrew Tate would be someone who makes a lot of promises to get to utopia. If you just do what he does, that's what types of courses he sold. Courses where he would talk about manipulative tactics to gain women. Strength, reverse wheel of fortune, in the sense that, I would say the strength of the red pill guys, and, when we talk about Andrew Tate specifically, and people, and the type of positive things that he says, is that he is trying to get, like, a lot of these incel and loser guys to break out of their shitty cycles. People who start working out, taking care of their bodies, because they realize, that inherently is not going to make your life better to just like give in to your addictions that make your life more difficult. Reverse wheel of fortune as a strength makes sense for the red pill guys who are at the very least getting people to think about things, a little more abstractly. And the 3 of cups for weakness, I think, is like, there's not really like some kind of social celebration. Because that's what the 3 of cups, I think, would be like social, like familial celebration. The fact that he put strength as bonus damage against females. It's like, yeah, this sort of adversarial approach to women is not inherently constructive towards young, lonely men. Whether they can like believe that, women are illogical and they make illogical arguments, it won't help you. So then they are told like, you got to just get enough money so that you can control poor women. That's how you escape the problem of being a lonely person. You think you want to get laid, and if you're an incel type, or if you just have severe trauma of some kind, or just bred into it. These guys are really just being primed for like maladaptive interactions with women. It's not effective for them, but it's also not effective for society, really. Even if you wanted to push for the traditionalist ways of doing it, like having some respect for women, like as equals, is kind of like inherently going to need to be a part of it.
Their faction leaders are some of the worst in the game, to be honest. People have pointed out their kits, they're pretty strong in terms of the shock value and aggression and horizontal influence. But in terms of durability, it's just you can't preach against degeneracy and also be pushing degeneracy on the other hand. So they have kind of an uphill battle. If you can find a more stable, more normie appealing faction leader, then the red pill movement might have some ability to metamorphosize into something more productive and influential. Next, we have the Democratic Socialists. Democratic Socialists are the champions of class politics. The current meta in the Great Meme Wars is one that tends to reward people who focus on class politics more, because a lot of the problems we face are lack of home ownership, techno-feudalism, extreme wealth inequality. Being able to go into debt to buy a burrito is not really anything that's pro-human or productive for society. So the ideologies that can incorporate these critiques and offer solutions, like the
Democratic Socialists getting the 5 of Swords, is once again bringing in concept of like everyone competing and disagreeing. For strength, we have reverse 2 of Wands. The strength is the fact that there is constant going back and forth, sort of like stagnation in certain progress, at least on the central authority level. If you are a democratic socialist, or if you're a socialist in general, what you want is a stable bureaucracy that is able to just like provide everyone's needs and like make sure everything is taken care of on some level. The democratic socialists, you can kind of look at the concept of democracy and liberty as not only that's how things ought to be. It can also be seen as like that is kind of how things can be stable. Okay, so if you have a democratic structure, sure, it's going to be difficult for like certain radical ideas to be passed through, including totalitarianism and like brutal types of dictatorships. It will slow things down, but it seems inherently necessary. So democratic socialists are kind of like, they're not Marxist-Leninists. The Soviet republicanism, or whatever it's called, like they have a democratic structure that's supposed to be like, these people vote in these guys, and these guys vote in these guys, and these guys voting these guys, all the way to the top who runs things. The one-party system. So it is a type of democracy. Whether it's enforced correctly or not, that's a different story. The Marxist-Leninists see themselves as like resistance to Western imperialism, which is a real threat, right? The West will try to overthrow that government and make them capitalist. Seeing some level of authoritarianism as necessary is just like kind of, you could see the reasoning behind that. There were also democratically elected socialists who were overthrown by the West. So there's a lot of negative attitudes towards Western imperialism on the left. But holding on to some principles like democracy for democratic socialists would be the state bureau for the betterment of the working class. Yeah, it is difficult for someone to get to the top and just take charge, take away our freedom. But that's the thing. Like, how do we even reach that point? Because that's not how things are now. We don't have a stable, centralized bureaucracy. But democratic socialists currently operate under capitalist liberalism. So that's probably also part of their strength is they're working within the system to some degree. Maybe that's the part of their weakness. Let's look. Their weakness literally is the reverse strength card. And I think that's a big thing. That's probably would be a Marxist-Leninist critique. Democratic socialists lack strength. Bernie Sanders specifically is a very strong man, and yet is it enough to defeat capitalism and how much it's destroying the economy? Like, is working within the system really that strong? Maybe democratic socialism is how things ought to be. It may not be like very powerful against capitalism. I mean, right now with Citizens United, we can't even get a crumb of socialism.
Democratic socialists can very well, are going to have a pretty solid advantage. Their faction leader, Bernie Sanders, is pretty good. In my opinion, he's a little overrated. Everybody seems to love Bernie, and I get why. But personally, I think his kit is just not as overpowered as people make it out to be. And, he's good. He's a solid starting point. But you really need people who are more focused on class and can definitely resist the propensity to kind of devolve into identity politics and all the stuff that is really a risk to left-wing factions. At the start of the game, you are...
See, I don't agree with that. I think, once again, this terminally online thing, because it's a propaganda technique, at the very least, auditing the attitude of what we call quote-unquote woke politics in certain spheres, it's not an unworthy thing. The woke mind virus, however, is not what he's talking about. Woke mind virus is a fake thing that describes basically just the generally progressive way of looking at the world, as if that's not what is representative of like the Enlightenment movement, where democracy and freedom even comes from. Black Lives Matter is able to like take over the microphone. People who are worried about police brutality and the inherent conditions of society that like, lead to people just like having these destitute fucking lives where they're just like being brawled with on the street by fucking state hired thugs. I'm not saying P.F. Young specifically, but people don't really seem to want to accept that racism is still a real thing in any degree. That doesn't, now to me, yes, class issues are the number one, for sure. I will not. I mean, that's obvious. And it does bother me when people say that's class reduction. No, number one. Yeah, it is. Sorry. Class issues are number one. Everything else is still valid. Race issues especially, women's issues are still valid. If there are a bunch of people saying that there is a bunch of racism going on, it's at least worth taking seriously. There's still effects of gerrymandering. There's still, I mean, the fact that crack cocaine was injected into the black communities by the government, verified stuff, in the 90s. There seems to almost be like an ongoing war that the ruling establishment has with black people. It's kind of weird, huh?
Allied with the woke left, and your biggest challenge is going to try to be avoid getting annexed by them, because if you do, you're going to lose a lot of the class-based advantages that really give you a leg up.
It's
so
not a democratic,
that,
and also keep in mind, this is not a democratic socialist. I mean, he's probably talking about the DSA of America. Progressives, typically on the left, for sure. That's just a thing, that's a unity thing, because inherently what the left is striving for, especially on the more democratic side of things, is egalitarianism. And things get worse for the middle class, that's all going to disappear, and it's just going to be like a militant movement. The democratic socialists are going to disappear, and you're going to miss them. You're going to wish they came back and just gave us free healthcare, public transportation on a mass scale, and free food, and, you know, no longer just like, even like rent control, and even like, you know what, subsidized housing completely. You're going to miss that.
Kind of draw a clear distinction, then you're going to have a good path forward. Overall, we'll give them a B+. They are a solid faction. They're vulnerable to some of the classic identity politics, woke mind virus type stuff, but they offer very good solutions and have some serious potential. And then lastly, we have the Black Pill Doomers, who are led by none other than Satan himself. These people are really cringe and pathetic and anti-human and lack optimism. And the ideology spreads and is appealing because it capitalizes off the fact that you don't have to do anything, you don't have to have any principles, no beliefs. You can abdicate all responsibility and just lie on the couch and cover yourself in Cheeto dust. And so you're gonna...
All right, so this one, we got what he calls the black-pilled doomers, which I've always seen black-pilled as like, like nihilists. That would be like the school shooters and stuff like that. All right, so it's interesting. We got a -8 of wands for the black-pilled doomers. Mona Lisa Overdrive, which I don't know anything about that. I just know the song by Navras. Did some of the stuff on the Matrix soundtrack. They have a song called Mona Lisa Overdrive, which might be on the Matrix soundtrack. So Black Pill Doomers, I mean, -8 of wands is kind of, and I guess that's inherent to what they believe. Like, they are just true. Like, why bother do anything pessimistic? You know, nihilism is a way of transitioning. If enough people become nihilistic, that leads to massive changes in society. So it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. Their strength is the reverse 2 of wands. Everything sucks, and then you're going to die one day, and the world is going to end. So as a strength, that can actually like take away a lot of inhibitions and kind of like make you truly explore deep within yourself. You're shedding away at everything. After you've lost everything, that's when you're truly free. And the weakness is probably like there's like a lack of love in the because the Ace of Cups is like a new love type of thing. You got a new passion, new passions. Oh, you know, it seems to be like, yay, it's the beginning of a relationship maybe. Or usually if you're in love, you're not black-pilled. If you're black-pilled in love, like 2 people who are black-pilled in love, usually it ends up being a pretty cute thing. Now, if they're completely black-pilled, even after falling in love, that's like usually the gas station couples, the junkies on the side of the road. The ideology being black-pilled, it lacks love. It lacks the ability to really like flourish and create new things. All right, so I'm gonna draw a final card to wrap up everything as he wraps up his own shit. Before we get to whatever his announcement.
I'm going to have a large amount of like numbers behind this, but the quality of the individuals, the quality of the units are not very great. And so if you're going to play as the Black Pill Doomers, really your only hope is that the entire world collapses so that you can say, I told you so. And then that's really the only advantage of doing this. Overall, we're going to give them a D- because they don't really have any principles, and at least every other faction is willing to stand up for something and be pro-human in principle.
Yeah,
except for the transhumanists maybe. But this is a admittedly dangerous faction to all other factions, and if you're playing as someone else, you're going to have to deal with them at some point. All right, everyone, thank you for watching, and FYI,
All right, so we got 7 of Cups. 7 of Cups is kind of like the middle. The 7 is usually the number that challenges the relationship, like 7 years. You know, that's a urban legend, but it's probably to some degree true, right? If you draw the card, I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, because, right, the future is up to you. No matter what, the future's up to you. Don't get too deep into this shit and allow it to control your life. This final card, talking about this great meme wars stuff. Seven of Cups can, like, it can be seen as like, oh, you can choose to be left or right. You could choose to be a capitalist or a socialist. But that might just be like a very convenient way of categorizing things. P.F. Jung might benefit from trying to look at like ideology in a way that isn't just like a bunch of like little factions that you can choose, and that'll bring you to victory. There's an inherent struggle going on between corporations and workers and renters. All right? Cool.